Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. The refugee crisis, which is actually unfolding in Ukraine today, which is engulfing the entire continent of Europe, has a historical precedence, how these refugees have been handled. And of course, those of us who actually remember the partition of our country, for example, my grandparents were refugees when they came into India. It's a historical precedence that actually follows. To discuss this entire thing and the ramifications of this crisis, I have with me Lieutenant General Anil Malik, a strategic thinker, a writer and a speaker. As a matter of fact, he was also the commandant of the Armored Corps Center and School and the senior directing staff of the National Defense College and many more appointments during his illustrious career in the Indian Army. Thank you, sir, for joining me for this, I think, very, very critical discussion, which is not being spoken about, the refugee crisis, which is ongoing because of the war in Ukraine.
Thank you, Aadi. Jai Hind, and it's a pleasure being here on your show. The subject carries emotional value. Like you said, you talked about your family coming in from those. So do I belong to in a family which migrated from erstwhile West Punjab. So for us, this has been a thought process which has always crossed our mind, that are we doing the right things? Are we doing the right movements? Are we making the right kind of noises? So this is a subject which will always continue to arouse our curiosity. It will also continue to make us think as to how the future must keep unfolding, how we must look at such things. And the basic thing, wars will happen. There will be emotional crisis. There'll be a thing, but the ultimate thing is the humanitarian aspect that we all need to be aware of, need to understand. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to address this particular issue.
Well, it's my pleasure, sir. And before we begin, sir, as any subject requires a little bit of a historical background, we in India have a huge history of a refugee crisis, not very long ago. 75 years is not long for a country's history. Taking that into consideration, there are, of course, certain conventions and guidelines that are there in the world bodies with regards to refugees. Can you give us a historical background as to what they are, so that we can put the current crisis into some kind of a context?
Okay, Aadi. The 20th century per se has been an era when we've had a number of these refugee issues coming up, right? We all know that at the end of the First World War, there were millions of people who were thrown out of their homes. They did not know where to go. There were no systems in place. While people did try, the parties to the war, at the end of the war, tried to put things together. The League of Nations came in. They put some documents together. But what was actually achieved at that stage was only to be able to provide travel documents to people so that they could move from one area to the other area. There was no well-defined methodology. In fact, the term refugee was not even defined at that stage. Now, post the First World War, the intermediate years, Second World War came in, where a larger number of such happenings took place. And because of that post-Second World War era, people decided to put their heads together, and the United Nations had a major role to play at that stage. We initially had the United Nations Convention for Human Rights. The customary international laws were framed, and those were put into place. And having done that, an attempt was made to put this convention for caring of the refugees together. And the first such document that emerged was the 1951 Convention on Refugees. I'm sure we are all familiar with it. We don't have to go to the back. But what is important in is that was the first time our attempt was made to define what or who is a refugee. An attempt was also made to differentiate between a refugee and a migrant. A lot of times we keep mixing up the two terms, right? So this was the stage when it was done. But the most important thing that emerged out of this convention is what is called Article 33 of the UN Convention on Refugees, which talks about non-refoulement. The term itself implies that a person who has crossed into your area cannot be sent back if he is not willing to do so. Now, this is the basic principle on which the Refugee Convention works. So two important things that emerged. One was the definition of who is a refugee. Anybody who felt was out of his own country or his area of inhabitation, he was able to, and if he had fears of persecution in his own homeland, he could be termed as a refugee. So that was one identity that was given. And two, like I said, that once he entered another country, the UN Convention very clearly, in the article that I mentioned earlier, brings out that a person cannot be sent back. Now, but this convention had some shortcomings. For obvious reasons, it was done post the war. And the two major things that emerged over a period of time, and one was that it was Europe-centric. Okay. For obvious reasons, because the war had been fought there. But what about all those people who were in Southeast Asia or in Africa or the Middle East, who had also been through the same trauma of the World War? But this convention did not pay attention to them. The second thing was, it talked about only people who had to move out or became refugees prior to 1951. That is prior to the convention being adopted. Right. Now, as I said, people realize that this problem is not confined to Europe. And two, that you can't lay down such timeline because this is a perpetual problem, and this is going to continue. And as came out, we saw over the years that. So, what was adopted then was the 1967 protocol. There is very little difference between the two, the convention and the protocol. In fact, when we refer to any document, we still refer to the 51 convention. The 67 protocol is an add-on which removed these two issues that were there. One, that it was not Europe-centric anymore, it was across the board. And two, the timeline of 1951 was. So that's firstly the difference between these two. Now, you will realize that a lot of countries became signatories to the UN Convention, and a lot did not. And India is one such case which did not become signatory to the convention. In fact, if you are aware that out of the South and Southeast Asia, out of the 48 countries that are here, only 20 are signatories to the convention. Right? Similarly, if you go to West Asia, you'll find that Israel, Iran, I think Yemen, and one more country are signatories. The rest are not even signatories to the convention. The Confederation of Independent States, the CIS, Uzbekistan is still not a signatory to this convention. Then you have countries like Bangladesh, you have Indonesia, Malaysia. None of these are signatories to the convention. It is very ironical, but these are the areas which have been facing the maximum problems, right? So there is a very catch-22 situation here as to how such countries deal with this problem when they're not signatories to the convention, right? And therefore, this is which I'll be talking about later when we come into greater details. But these are the problems that are. Now, you will find that while these countries which are not signatories, in fact, a total of only 148 of the UN members are signatories. While they are not signatories, but they have been faced with this problem. And they've been handling it, like we took the case of India. The partition, the Tibet refugees. We've had our share of Sri Lankan Tamils coming into the country. The 1971 war, the number of people who from Bangladesh who came across here and stayed on for years, which later on became a political game also. The Rohingyas of late, 2017 onward, we've had these Rohingyas coming in there. So all these countries are facing the problem. They are doing their bit in their own way to help out the refugees. Yet, there are some countries which are signatories, like, for example, Japan. Now, Japan is one of the maximum humanitarian donor for the refugee cause. But their asylum laws are so strict that till today, I don't think even one person has been given refugee status. Okay. Now, based on these convention and the protocol, some countries which had not originally joined the convention, later on when the protocol was brought in, because let's take the example of the United States. Okay, the United States was not an original signatory to the convention. The president then said that this is this kind of a refugee thing is going to be interfering in our independence, and it's going to be interfering. This convention is detrimental to our own interests. So they did not sign the convention. It's only later on in 1967, I think, when Lyndon B. Johnson was the president, they signed the convention and ratified it, the protocol, right? And similarly, a lot of other countries at that stage. In fact, now the United States has what is called the refugee law, which was passed in 1980, which gives the president powers to take in refugees. But they have made it very clear. There are numbers fixed every year. A presidential directive is given every year as to how many people. In fact, they pegged it around 50,000 a year is the numbers that, of course, now we've seen the exception we'll talk about later of 100,000 is what President Biden has talked about for the Ukrainians. But otherwise, they follow that. When Trump was president last year, I think the directive was only for 12,000. We've had years when they've been a little more than 50,000, but then that is the benchmark figure they have taken. And mind you, how do they take care of it? Not only have they laid down the numbers, but they've also given the responsibility. The state has not taken on the responsibility. Okay, that responsibility is given out to various charitable associations, to the churches, to various so-called NGOs who are given the responsibility to take care of this. And any misdemeanor is the problem of that organization which is looking after. So that's as far as the convention and how it was adopted and how it has been taken care of in the countries which are not signatories to it. Problems which occur because of that, we'll talk about. Now, over the years, the refugee issue, one more point that I like to highlight here. One is that I mentioned about the migrants. Now, the migrants basically are defined as those people who may be leaving their country of their own choice for better avenues. For example, if we a lot of Indians go to other countries for education, for jobs, but they are migrants. They are not refugees. Let's be clear on that. They have not been, they do not have any fear of prosecution. Persecution. And they also have the support of their respective governments. Till they are absorbed into they become citizens there. So the government of India, the government of whichever country they belong to, is responsible for their security. And that is why you've seen our reaction, whether it was the Middle East or in Yemen or now in Ukraine, the prompt response of the government of India to get its students back, to make avenues open for the citizens who wish to get back. So these were all the migrants. In fact, we know of so many migrants who were sort of fooled by the agents. A lot of money was exchanged hands and they were pushed into things. I remember going to Amsterdam, I think 2006, and somebody took me, an Indian acquaintance of mine said, on the Sunday, come with us to the Gurdwara. So we went to the Gurdwara to pay homage, and there I met at least 100 people who were taking the sanctuary in those Gurdwaras. They were being fed by the well-to-do there, and they had yet not been declared or recognized in that country. So those were the migrants. The third category of person that we need to understand is the internally displaced. But this is a major issue. In fact, the figures given out by the United Nations, there are about 84 million people of concern, out of which about 24 million are refugees. The rest are internally displaced people. Even now, when we talk about Ukraine, we've said about 3.5 million people have left for fear. But more than that, about 6 billion people have become homeless. Now, you see images on the television and various publications of people on the railway stations, people taking shelter in places where, and they are the ones who have no future. Ironically, the convention also doesn't recognize. Okay, so they're not going to be getting that aid or the international recognition. And if you don't have the international recognition, Ukraine or any country for that matter who is in that situation is not particularly at the moment in a position to take care of these people. And post the diktat of the Ukraine government that people between 16 to 60 are not to leave the country, we know that the refugees, the internally displaced people are basically women and children. Okay, so these are another lot of people who are of concern. Right. Now, till some years back, I would say till the complete 20th century, most countries didn't bother too much about these refugees. What was happening in Afghanistan or maybe in the Middle East was of very little concern. 2015 is yet another landmark in the era of refugees. Right. That's when the floodgates opened. We know that the Syrians, people from all over, started flooding into Europe. The routes were either through Turkey, the Aegean Sea, the Mediterranean Sea. We read of that tragedy where about 700-800 people drowned. In fact, that tragedy was instrumental in Germany taking a lead. Angela Merkel was so moved by that episode that she decided to take in anybody and everybody who wanted to come into Germany. Right? That changed the whole equation. In fact, Turkey became so overburdened, Turkey, Greece, they became so overburdened with this refugee influx coming in that they started pushing them out to other countries. Greece is one example where this problem was occurred. But as they kept coming in, some of the countries in Europe had open policies. They reacted to the situation and decided to absorb them. But then the ball game started. That is it the responsibility of the country where they first come in, or is it going to be the responsibility of the complete European community? Now, this is a sore point which still exists. And again, a catch-22 situation. Some of the countries which opposed people coming into their country at that stage are today in the front of the Ukraine crisis that is purchased. Poland, Hungary, Romania, all these countries said, no way we are. And there was something called the Dublin regulation, which was passed, that people could be sent out to the other countries. And they were just not willing to allow this to happen. So gradually, 2015, like I said, this thing happened. The Ukrainians, after the Crimea thing, a lot of them went to Russia, a lot of them went to Belarus. But Poland again became a area where everybody came. I know for certain that about 1 million people came into Poland at that stage. But what was good was that once the crisis was over, majority went back. They were not keen to stay on there. They wanted to get back home. Some moved on to other countries, right? And they moved on to countries where either because of the ability to transgress borders, the Schengen applied to them. That was one avenue which was there. You could move around anywhere in Europe for 90 days without any issue. So you had people, their relatives who were in other countries, their friends in other countries, they all went down. They were quickly absorbed. And that is why that particular crisis did not catch center stage of the world. Okay. But then we saw what happened to the refugees in Africa. Right? There were massacres, there were war, open rebellion against them. The Afghans, most of them have gone into Pakistan or Iran, and many of them to India. So the world was handling it as the cards were being played. There were no firm methodology being adopted. Right? But I must give credit here to the European Union. They learned their lessons well. In fact, right in this, what has been applied today in Ukraine, the temporary protection directive which has been given, where people can be absorbed for up to 3 years. They've given them the avenue of jobs. They've given them the avenue of food, shelter, healthcare. And there are a whole lot of things. The UN Convention itself has got a whole list of things which rights. One thing which I forgot to mention, the convention gives you the rights and also gives you your obligations, the host state. If you're a refugee, you have certain obligations. It's not that you only enjoy the rights. Those rights that are there in the convention and which are subsequently been applied at other places also are gradual in nature, depending on how long the crisis is. Right. You even have things like access to courts if you feel you're grieved. Right, that is a right given by the convention. It may not apply because a lot of these people have not stayed on for that long. Education. Now, right to education is prescribed. But how much of it is followed, how much of it is, it all depends on the situation. Now, one of the reasons why, anything you want to discuss at this stage?
Well, the matter of fact of what you're saying is very critical, that the global community responds very differently to all these crises. And you brought out Africa was not very, very welcome. The Middle Eastern crisis was not very welcome in Europe. But today, the same countries are having to open their arms and bring it about. So, it's a very interesting this thing. And I'd request you if you can just dwell a little more about, I won't call it the hypocrisy, but the differential attitude of certain states with regards to this particular thing.
Okay. I'm glad you raised this issue, because it's a very interesting. And I'm glad you did discard the word hypocrisy, because it's not really hypocrisy.
It's not. Yes.
We have to. No, I said I'm glad you, but the media keeps following it, so that's the way it's looked at. The fact of the matter is, any country, what is the first thing that they look at? We all human beings. We want to help out, right? But we do not want interference in our way of living. The biggest objection in Europe to the refugees coming in from Afghanistan, West Asia, Africa, is the difference of culture. Okay. To start with, there was this lot of propaganda about religion. The convention gives you the right to practice your religion. It's prescribed, right? So there was a lot of talk initially, and of course, like you said, political moves, election thoughts bring out that, look, if these people of a particular community are allowed to come in here, this will become a haven for a religion which is not too friendly with us. Goes back to the clash of Huntington's clash of civilization, perhaps, right? It also may sound that we had across the globe labeled that particularly people of a particular country are all terrorists, right? Or people of a particular following are not welcome here because of the fear of terrorism, right? Now, a lot of studies were carried out. Even I think Trump made a bombastic statement while he was president that no way I will allow such people to enter the United States. In fact, that is the reason why that year only 12,000 people got entry to the United States. The problem was that there is a Cato Institute. They blew this trumpet that people of this type, or the refugees, once they come in, are going to be a national security threat. This is national security is something which you can play any the way you want to mold it. But their own studies later on brought out that post 9/11, the number of people who came in there, maybe I think 1 in a million was found to have any kind of terrorist link. And this is the Cato Institute's own based on their own surveys, right? So 1 in a billion come anywhere. In any case, it's my perception that while there will be people who will make use of this garb of coming in along with the refugees, this is what happened in Africa. People carrying weapons, people belonging to rebel groups, use this refugee route to get into another country and then start a war with their own place of natural inhabitants, right? Till we had to bring in the local state, the police, and even international intervention had to take place to put a stop to this. Right? But that was nothing of this sort was happening in Europe at that stage. So that while this card was played for some time, but it died a natural death. Okay. But what was of concern, the common man was only worried for two things. One, I hope this will not disturb the way we live, our culture. A big debate has taken place in Poland, not only now, but over the last few years, because they also received a lot of people through Belarus, through Latvia and such countries. That we are okay with these people coming here. We will, on humanitarian ground, we'll give them food, we'll give them shelter. But we don't want them to interfere with our culture.
Way of life.
Now, whether you say the color of the skin matters, okay, to some extent it does matter. The common man does not have time for these things. In all problems, my perception, the common man has no time for this. These are played up by vested interests. Yes, but what is of concern is the ability. Now, this invitation that jobs will be made available to them. The convention says provide them education, provide them jobs, provide them food. Nobody objects to food, nobody objects to shelter. People are willing to take them into their own homes, right? But these are all time-bound.
Right.
Now, if they're going to now, firstly, we've said 3 years. This is going to ring alarm bells very soon. 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, alarm bells are going to start. We all know that soon these people may become cheap labor available for industries. Big pharma, and there are enough examples in our own country which one can talk about subsequently, but where they become cheap labor. So what is happening? You're depriving the locals of jobs. Because governments, what they do when such things happen, they go overboard. I must prove to the international community that I am going out of my way to help them. So my first priority to give jobs is to X person who has come in at the moment from Ukraine because he is in trouble. But this is not the priority. Priority still remains on food, shelter, healthcare. Everything else falls. Tomorrow, if my school can only take in a class of 20 children, and if 20 more are brought in there, right, there's bound to be resentment. Jobs, there's bound to be resentment. Now, after all, there are underprivileged in every society. In all these countries which are going to take in the people, there are people who are poor, who do not have steady jobs. If they're going to start competing against these refugees, this is bound to happen. Okay, so this is as far as that particular aspect of why that. And let me tell you, the governments per se are not saying that this guy will go and that guy will not go. If you are a passport holder, if you have been given residency in Ukraine, well, then you are as much entitled to be brought into Poland or to Romania or to Moldova or any of these countries. Right? Yes, there will be local sentiments, let's say for the border guard, or for the man who running the train system out of Ukraine. Right? If he's got a carrying capacity of 100, willy-nilly, whether we like it or not, such things happen at the ground. So that people have been, but it is not that grave a crisis that has been created or visualized that there is a differentiation being made, and I don't think that is happening.
The world always, reacts to different situations according to the prevailing, I would say, direction of the wind. It's always like that. So there might be differences, and of course, an incident in Germany on the New Year's in front of the Berlin railway station actually doesn't really help the cause of the refugees which came in from Russia. And Angela Merkel, who by the end of it was termed as Mother Merkel, um, was blamed for a lot wrong that actually happened. And of course, in France also we've had incidents. Uh, Before I come to the impacts of something like this, I'd like you to kind of
just may I add something on this particular aspect?
Please.
Two things. I mentioned about Angela Merkel response to the ship carrying 800 people who sunk. She had tears in her eyes, and she was the first one said, any country which is not taking them, I will take them. So rightfully, she's been termed what she was. The era that we are talking about, was a era of transition now taking place in Germany. Okay. So such things were played up, right? They were brought out. In France also, in fact, a couple of these terrorist incidents that happened, it's been proved that there's very little to do with the people who came in from outside. Okay. So these are propaganda wars that will go on. But suffice to say that only thing that I was mentioning about European Union is they got their act together.
Yeah, of course.
This period, I was mentioning a little while back about this temporary protection directive. Now, this actually came in 2001 after the Yugoslav crisis. Right? They realized that, look, this is something which we could anticipate. We could anticipate that there is a crisis going to take place. There are going to be refugees. And why do we have to wait till the last minute? So over the years, they have been making new laws. Their refugee asylum laws have undergone change. There have been debates. The European Union, I would say, is doing a commendable job in refining it every stage. And that is why today, when this Ukraine thing started off, the reactions were so immediate. Right? So now we cannot say that pehle to you never bothered. Now your reactions are different. But one of the reasons is that they have refined their systems. Okay. They've had extensive debates on these issues amongst the European Union. And in fact, that process is still on to have more foolproof refugee conventions, within the overall charter of the United Nations Convention.
So as I was saying, sir, there were these incidents that actually put up a very dark face on the crisis of 2015 and onwards. Of course, there will be incidents here as well. I'm sure all the Ukrainians are not doodh ka dhula hua, as if I may use this thing. There will be some incidents here and there when people actually go, and there will be violence. There'll probably be some thefts and so on and so forth. That's how stuff is. I mean, it's not something foolproof. Having said that, sir, the perception that was created and the perception which is being created right now, the world was divided. Today, everybody has their hearts bleeding for the Ukrainians, which is very nice. I appreciate that. Even India has been sending a lot of humanitarian aid, and there is nobody, I think, who would stand not to support that. Having said that, the same kind of feelings, somewhere down the line were not shown for Afghans who were left behind in the lurch. And that is a question which is actually bringing about a lot of discussion. Syrians actually managed to cross over the sea, which is not a very long distance, but they managed to reach. The Afghans were left in the lurch, and a lot of countries kind of, were not able to help. That, I don't know if you would agree with me, but created a bit of a line within the treatment or the acceptance of refugees from certain parts of the world. How would you put that across in the global context today, sir?
I would say that while the debate has started out all afresh today, that has the international community learned their lesson? And is the Ukrainian model going to be put into place all across the globe?
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So that is a thought process. I don't think this is going to happen. Whatever you may say, the cultural divide will going to continue to remain.
Absolutely.
Afghans, where it comes to, say, Iran or Pakistan, where people, similar culture, perhaps common language, common eating habits, common way of doing things, their way of paying obeisance, everything is common. Much easier for that country to absorb them. And so also for the refugees, right? Their comfort zone also lies there.
Yeah.
Who are those Afghans who want to? But they also realize that a lot of them went back to Afghanistan. Whenever as Afghanistan has a history, whenever there is a crisis, they
withdraw.
They've gone across, and they've all gone back because their comfort zone lies. But then, as the generations are changing, right? Generations are changing. There is the aspirations also changing. Even amongst the Afghan population, there are aspirations that if this is an opportunity there, why should I hang around in Pakistan, which itself doesn't know where it's going? Or Iran, which can turn, which themselves, because of the sanctions, are not able to really take proper care of the refugees. So a lot of them are either being pushed back or they are going back. So they find that this is a good opportunity for us to head to areas where there will be jobs available, the families will be secure, the futures will be secure. We know that a lot of them have been coming to India, but we'll talk about that subsequently when I'm touching on India. But the fact of the matter is that whatever may change, we also have a sentence which I remember reading in school, and I took part in a debate where the subject was men never learn from history. Okay. Yes, this crisis will be there. They will be there. A lot of humanitarian feeling is there. But as long as that fear of the cultural thing remains, I'm afraid these things are, we probably get back to the old system. We may bring in new directive, new convention. After all, the UNHCR can do this much and no more. But basic people who have to do something is the country where there's the host country. All other organizations are only supporting the host or assisting those countries. The thought process is the people. Who matters? The common man on the street is going to matter. How is he going to look at? How is he going to look at these people?
Absolutely.
So until, I'm afraid that we are not going to have a magic wand being spun all over Europe and other such countries that, okay, from today onward, these gentlemen are going to be, they are equated to Ukrainians, or they are equated to anybody else coming in from any of these countries. And I can assure you that should the situation arise, and if there are people who are migrants from Russia also, in the earlier eras, they are accepted. So it is not going to be a Russia versus Ukraine that tomorrow people are going to say that you are a Russian, you are not welcome. Okay. Where humanitarianism comes in, all this is put aside. But I remember reading somewhere an interview of people from Poland. Okay. That talked about this particular aspect. Okay. Are you differentiating between people people from Europe or otherwise. And the answer of the common man was this: he is most welcome into my home. He is most welcome to get food. I'll give him the health care. But I will not allow them to become permanent people here who are going to deprive me of A, B, and C. So I'm afraid this is not going to change.
So when we talk about the influx of refugees, there's obviously going to be a limit for any country that it can go to help out these refugees. It's not never ending. Of course, after a certain point of time, as you just mentioned, there's going to be a pushback from the, this thing. This war will get over someday. Today, tomorrow, day after, there's negotiations on, something will happen. And then in due course of time, in 2-3 months, these countries will now expect these guys to go back. Some of them will, some of them won't. And that's where the issue comes in. How long can the neighboring countries support a crisis like this? Because shortage of funds is even in the richest of richest nations in the world. So how long can they actually go on this? What is the sustainability factor of these countries?
Aadi, this is a very, very important issue. I'll just take an example of a small country like Moldova. Okay. There are refugees coming in there, particularly the people from the area of Odessa and the southern areas. Easiest for them to get to Moldova. Moldova has a population of approximately what? 4 million? 3.5, 4 million. Look at the size of the country. Half of it is hilly terrain, right? So inhabited areas are what they are. I think 13,500 square kilometers of an area.
Really, yes.
Yeah, and I think 50% of it is where people are not really living. So the small areas that they are. Now, if the percentage of refugees start exceeding the population by a particular percentage, normally I think some places I read about 14% of the population is now refugees, right? Now, try and imagine if the kind of resources. Moldova is the poorest country in Europe. Okay. After all, what is their sustenance? Basically, all their sustenance was based on Russia. Okay. Now, if tomorrow a large influx of refugees comes in there, presently the numbers are limited. But if it does happen, there is bound to be a stage when the Moldovan government will have no option but say either you go back, which we hope they will go back, or you move on. And their answer to the European Union also is, look, we supported your stand, but we are not in a position to keep these people here. So also Poland. Poland has been already talking about it prior to this crisis, that we cannot sustain these things. So this blanket directive of 3 years, you're okay to stay. Actually, the temporary protection directive talked about 1 year. Right? So this time, an open-ended thing has been said. That 1 year was applied. It has never been applied. Actually, from 2001, this is the first time this was applied, and they made it 3 years. Now, 3 years is a long time. No country can sustain it? The European funds, the European Union funds are saying a couple of $1 billion coming in. The Americans have said they send the money. But the resources do not come up overnight. Right? And if they do, I cannot share my resources. Why do you think the problems occurred here in India? Because of the fact that people felt that our jobs are going away, our livelihood, our food basket is being shared. Okay. This is very good for a particular period. So it can't happen openly, and it's not going to happen anywhere. There's bound to be resistance, and there's bound to... the Dublin regulation now laid down quotas. Okay, each country will absorb somebody. There's a resistance to that. Right? Somebody says that I cannot afford this. Now, here in the case of Ukraine, when the war gets over, the present situation gets over, there are a lot of people who want to go back. Okay. Because basically what has happened is the women and children who are here. Majority of the men folk are there. The families are there. So these people will want to get back to their homes, whatever state they are in. There will be a stage of reconstruction, rehabilitation, everything that will take place. But what is going to happen is that those who stay on, unless the numbers are very small, there's bound to be resentment, and there's bound to be times when people are going to oppose this way.
So India is something that I wanted to talk about. I mean, probably at the end of our talk, and it's a difficult story for India. It's got a very large population on its own self, and it's got a neighborhood which is in crisis either one way or the other. We've got Myanmar going into a turmoil in the past 1 year. We've got Sri Lanka heading into a disaster. We've got two stable countries in Bangladesh and Burma and Bhutan, but Bangladesh there has been issues. Pakistan, which is a big issue. We've got Afghanistan, which is not in the neighborhood, but the immediate neighborhood of India. So we've got our own issues around here as well, and we're not a rich country by any sorts of the matter. We've got a lot of work to do internally. How do you see India's position more than giving humanitarian aid, sustaining something for a little bit? And we all know the Rohingya issue that actually burned in India quite hard at. How do you see India's position, and what do we do?
Okay, so I'll go back to the initial talk, portion of the talk, and then where I mentioned that India is not a signatory to the 1957 convention or the 1967 protocol. India had major objections at that stage, which continued. They were not satisfied with the definition of the refugee. One of the major objections India had was that the countries who are creating these refugees are not being held accountable. Right? And that, when I was talking about Poland, that is a debate which took place there also. Look, we didn't go and start this war there. Right? Some other gentleman goes and starts a war there, throws them out of their country, and why should we be absorbing? So India had objections to being a signatory to that, and also it felt that our own national security imperatives, the fact that we had issues right after independence, so we did not sign this convention. But what happened thereafter was that we, of course, like I said, the partition took place. The partition people came in. They were well absorbed because the roots were common there, while the boundaries were been drawn, but the people were the same. So there was no cultural difference. There was no problem. They flooded into Delhi. They flooded into all parts of the country, and they were well absorbed into society. The Tibetans, okay, the government of India took a deliberate thing, but mind you, this was when the Tibetans came in, they were organized into a particular methodology and put in certain areas where, as a community, whether it's in Delhi, where there is a Tibetan community. If you go along the Yamuna next to the interstate bus terminal, you'll find that the Tibetan community is there. Or we are all familiar with Dharamsala, McLeodganj, the seat of the government in exile. They are all there in a community. So they were well absorbed. The Sri Lankan refugees, I'm afraid there was a big issue about it. There was the north-south issue which came in, while the people in the south had an emotional attachment to that, because you can't blame them. A lot of them themselves had relatives there. They had interests in each other's
ethnicities, yes.
Now, what has happened is that the government of India takes care of only two kind of refugees: the Tibetans and the Sri Lankans. Identification of the people, their security needs. The first thing is always identification. Who is to be classified as a refugee? Is he an unwanted person? All that process has to be gone through. For the others, whether it is the people from Bangladesh or any other coming in, Afghans, it is the UNHCR who has been given this responsibility. Mind you, we do not accept the convention, but the responsibility has been given by the government of India to the UNHCR, and India takes full help of the UNHCR to carry out this process for them. Okay, this is something which is formalized. So when the UNHCR puts across that here is a lot of people which needs to be given refugee status, their word is taken by the government. Of course, there are always disputes. There, we have our own viewpoint on UN and UNHCR, but that's part of the game. It is bound to continue. But the fact of the matter is that here is a system which has been adopted. Now, this is all very good when individuals come in, but try and see when an exodus comes in, like it's happening in Ukraine, or when the Rohingyas came, or when we had the 71, the Bangladeshi refugees coming in. They disappeared into the homelands because there was no system in place. Now, how do we identify people? In India, it is the system is you are identified either by under the provision of the Passport Act or the Foreigners Act, 1920 vintage. Okay, that is the way we identify things. Now there is no streamlined system in place. What happens is that the local policeman, the local people say, okay, look, you are fit to come here or you're not fit to come here. Now, this does not meet the humanitarian issue. So, therefore, there's been a big debate in India also, and it's been going on for some time, that notwithstanding the fact that we are not signatories to the convention, notwithstanding the fact that we are concerned about national security, notwithstanding the fact that we are in a position to absorb only this much and no more, we cannot open the floodgates, right? But we do not have a statute or a law. It's left to the state government to decide. X state government says, I will allow these people here. The next government said, I will not allow. Look, if 7,000 Rohingyas were put up in a camp in Jammu, right? So it was not that they were let loose at the border. It was an organized system which was adopted to take them there. Now, while we are not signatories to the convention which prevents non-refoulement, but we are signatories to the UN human rights law and the international customary law. Both prevent us from sending people back. Okay. Now, what happened thereafter? You know, the Rohingyas case went to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Right. The Supreme Court gave a directive, not acceptable. The Rohingyas lost the case and said, send them back. Okay. So we clapped our back and said, Rohingyas, go back. Go back where? You can only send back a person to a place, to a country who is going to accept them. Now, in the case of the Rohingyas, neither Myanmar is willing to accept them. Bangladesh has its hands full. In fact, this was one of the major issues discussed by the Prime Minister when he visited Bangladesh.
Correct.
And the lady said that, look, you have a international standing. You got to help us out. Now, what has Bangladesh done? Set them up initially in camps in Chittagong, in Cox's Bazar. Now there's that place called Bhashan Char. There's an island in the...
yes. It's about 30 kilometers from the mainland.
Yeah. So 11,000 refugees have, I think, in the month of December moved there. So that is another way of doing it. You send them, maybe we all pick them up and send them to the Andaman Islands. Right? But that's not going to work. That's not the way it is. What do the Australians do? Australians have done this in those islands of Nauru and I forget the other name.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but again, they've been put there as a community, not allowed to interfere in day-to-day life. Afghanistan and India have historical ties. I know even as a child, I saw this movie called Kabuli Wala, in which there was this chap who used to bring pista and badam and sell it in the market. Today, you go to Lajpat Nagar in Delhi, you find a whole lot of these Afghans. Even the ones who came in later have been absorbed into that particular society because we have an affinity with them. But I'm afraid that if the numbers swell from Sri Lanka, right, and if they're going to be confined to, say, the southern states, and the other states said, I'm not going to allow this because we follow a federal system and there is no Government of India Act which says that refugees have to be taken care of in A, B, C, D manner. So that is the point that I was making initially. That we have all the concerns, our national security concerns, everything is very good. But we can't allow loose-ended things. We cannot allow this discretion that anybody and everybody will decide as to how to take care of it.
In other words, aajo dekhenge. It can't happen. Absolutely.
It can't happen, So therefore, there is definitely a need for an act of parliament to be brought in. See, Supreme Court said, send them back. The Chief Minister of, what is his name, Manipur or Mizoram, he said, no way, I'll allow them to go back. Because they have affinity. Right? People from the Chin province have always, they have a one-to-one affinity with each other.
Yeah, there's, open borders to 16 kilometers, so obviously there is a lot.
So we are heading for troubled times, and that's why I said the future needs to be looked at. Yes. We have to learn to anticipate these things. If you and me are discussing this issue today, that the way things are moving in Sri Lanka, this is going to happen. Now, we can't wake up on D+8 and say, "Ke, abhi kya karna hai?" And the Chief Minister of that state rings up the Prime Minister and says, "Look, so many guys have come here, now I can't take care of all of them. You send them to some other state," and the other state says, "I'm not going to take them." Right. So a reasonable system, a system of identification, system of initial absorption, something on the lines of what the European Union has done. Right. Make them comfortable. Our concerns on national security, ke terrorist ban jayega. Look, they are hard-pressed people who are coming. Even if an odd chap who is a bad hat comes in, he is not going to disturb the peace. But people who are going to disturb the peace are the ones who come in here hoping for to be absorbed and hoping to be given shelter are not taken care of. Then we will have crime coming. Then we will have laws being broken. Okay, because after all, that man has to eat his food. He's brought in his wife and children here. Then, till situation improves there, ideally, here again, we have to work towards trying to end the crisis there, which we are already sort of doing it, maybe for different reasons. Okay, not the humanitarian reason definitely at the moment, but fact remains that you take care of the people. It'll be some time and years before they start demanding rights. Today, you don't have to worry about education. You can give them online education. All of them been put into a and there are enough NGOs who will give you that platform to run classes for the children, so their education doesn't suffer. Even if you have to give them degrees subsequently in the years, you can do that. But we must have a system as to who can stay here, how long can they stay here. So this is a very important point that we have to take care of these things.
I think these crises are going to not stop, sir. There's stuff going around our neighborhood, and India, if it wants to become a responsible power, as you said, there has to be a system, which is this thing, and the centrality of India in terms of its position in the world is going to put in a lot of focus as to how India handles situations around its neighborhood. And I think that is something very, very interesting that you brought out. It's not going to be easy.
Aadi, you've just taken the words out of my mouth. I was going to keep that for the final concluding remark as to if India wants to have its rightful place
in the world
on the high table, if we are looking at becoming a permanent member of the United Nations, then you are expected to give the right responses.
That's true. That's true, sir.
And particularly on an issue like humanitarian issues, if you do not perform and if you do not, I'm afraid then the support that we are looking out from other countries when it comes to recognition of our strength. Today, our strength is being recognized, right? In other fields. Flourishing economy, doing well, large market, the population that we have is the world's biggest market today after China's people are avoiding. So we are the next big market. So everybody wants to come and set up shop here. Every country wants to. We've also become all part of the arms lobby. So this is also an open place for people to come, right? The fact of the matter is that when humanitarian issues are ignored, and if we don't thump the table, I'm afraid we are missing out on something, a particular important aspect which will take us to that high table.
Precipice of where we want to go. So let me, at the outset put this across that it's a heart-wrenching discussion to have. It's not something which is very positive where you can, find a glimmer of hope. It's not something that you'd like to discuss about because it involves, as you said, especially in Ukraine today, we see women and children. No matter who's right in this war and who made the mistakes, NATO or Russia or whatever it may be, the sufferers are the people who probably didn't even know what actually is happening in this whole arena of global politics. And it's really sad that at the end of it, they end up paying for the mistakes of the politicians and the decision makers. So it's not something which is very easy for any country to deal with, and especially a country like India, which wants to rise, as you just said, onto the global stage. It needs to get its act up with regards to how it needs to handle global crisis, and not just within its neighborhood. Of course, a lot of goodwill for India by sending, medical aid to Ukraine. It was mentioned by the president and the former president as well. So that's good. But of course, there's a lot that needs to be done. So I'd like to thank you for actually, dwelling upon this particular subject, and for our first interaction when we actually had a chat offline as to what should we talk about. And it seemed like the right moment to actually talk about this, as a subject of global importance, if I may put it that way. So thank you once again for joining me, sir. And I'd request you obviously to keep Dev Talks in your mind for a future, multiple future interactions. Until next time, for another subject and for another day, sir. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Aadi. Thank you very much. Each time one interacts on a subject like this, it reveals a new learning. So any such interaction opens my own horizon so much. And this is something which subject is very close to my heart. So every time I want to now get back and read some more on this. And let me tell you, each of the subjects that we, chapters or phases of what we discussed, is a study in itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and each of them is a subject of a talk by itself. So there's a lot more to it, and not only on these kind of subjects, but it will always be a pleasure to interact with you, Aadi. Look forward to more such interaction. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Jai Hind.